Prospect House Media.
And now, prepare yourself for the only weekly podcast you won't want to miss. Welcome to the Ameritocracy Show with Troy Edgar, live from our studios in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C.
Hey everybody, I am Troy Edgar and welcome to the Ameritocracy Show. Thank you for tuning in and checking it out. It is greatly appreciated. This podcast examines the conditions for personal and professional growth and opportunity across America. This week I met with Mohammad Khan, managing attorney at MNK Law and our LA studio. I worked with Mohammad for years, and I believe he's one of the best lawyers in the business. Based on overwhelming audience feedback, I wanted to provide this episode to help entrepreneurs choose legal representation for startups. I also think it'd be helpful for anyone facing a lawsuit or a legal situation that's never hired a lawyer before. Mohammad and I discuss situations and questions that you should consider when selecting an attorney. Lastly, I asked him, as a leader of a law firm that specializes in contract employment and labor law, what is his perspective on the economic future of California? It was clear his heart is with California, but his outlook was concerning. He encourages business owners to stay informed, engage your elected officials, and importantly, be active in your community to help implement change. His bottom line was, don't be passive and get involved. I hope you enjoy. Good morning, Mohammad. How you doing?
Good morning. I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me, Troy.
Oh, it's so awesome having you on the show. You and I do a lot of discussions on the phone, and it's really nice to get together in person.
It's great to meet in person. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I had done a couple interviews with some of our mutual friends,
right?
Lisa Papini and Les Whitney, and so I'm really excited to be able to finally have an opportunity to get you on the show. And I think that this is something that those two people are great people I've known. I've definitely known Lisa for a long time. But actually, you and I do some business together, and I thought this would be a great discussion and very helpful. You're a practicing lawyer here in Southern California, and some of the experiences that you and I've had together, I thought it'd be really helpful for our audience to kind of get an idea for people that are out there that have a business that are, potentially, growing it, getting to a certain point, needing to find different types of law representation. And then maybe if you'll indulge me, maybe I'll share a little bit. I've started a lot of businesses, and then I've also done a lot of work with you in that context, and maybe kind of we'll explain a little bit about starting up a business and some of the help that, from a legal perspective that you really need to consider kind of going through that. That sounds good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just say it's a pleasure to be on. I love the podcast. I love that Les and Lisa were on, and I think you're doing a fantastic job. So it's an honor to be here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mohammad. What I'd like to do, if it would be okay, is to maybe step back a little bit and give people a little bit of your background, if you wouldn't mind, and kind of what's leading up to, today you run a law firm called MNK Law. And but before that, maybe just your background, that'd be great.
Yeah, definitely. So I was born and raised in Palmdale, California. I have the most amazing parents in the world. They're immigrants that came over from Pakistan, sort of put their flag down in Palmdale, and they were entrepreneurs. So they owned small businesses, gas stations, restaurants. So at a very young age, I started working in the gas station. I remember on Saturdays and Sundays when the inventory would come in, I would go to the gas station and put up the candy bars. Maybe I ate a couple of them. I would put up the chips and put the drinks in the cooler. So at a very young age, I got to see the impact of business owners and what they do, and how if you work really hard, you can have a direct impact and an immediate impact on your own success. So born and raised in Palmdale, parents were in business. Right around high school, they ended up buying a restaurant, a fast food restaurant, kind of like an In-N-Out burger. And sure enough, I started working there. I learned to first clean the toilets, and then I went all the way to flipping burgers. And it was great. Looking back, it was incredibly important and informative of like what I would become. But I remember going to school 8 to 3, 3 o'clock to 10 o'clock, go to the restaurant, work, close the restaurant, and then on Saturdays and Sundays, go at 7 in the morning for the breakfast shift all the way until 10 at night, and just be at the restaurant and work and learn how to interact with other folks and lead and customer service. Restaurants can be brutal, to be frank. But yeah, so I did that. And then
what a great experience to be able to work with your family. I mean, it's one thing of like going off and having to go work for someone else, but a little bit of it is family time too. And you're learning, you're seeing what your parents, really down to kind of the way they carry themselves in business.
Absolutely.
And so that's a great experience. I've started a lot of companies, and I have 3 boys. All 3 of them have very specifically the consulting company that I have is one that each one of them have done a tour at different times. One of them is still at that company. But it's a special feeling. And I don't know about where your parents were, but you hope that I didn't care what type of business they did or whether they went into business or arts or whatever, but I wanted them to get kind of an idea of the principles of, you wake up every morning and you've got hundreds of people that you need to pay. Yeah. And so everybody kind of depends on someone at the top waking up and being motivated. Yeah. And
it's such a good, it's a great point because, and it's on a different scale, but we opened up at 7 o'clock and breakfast had to be served, right?
Right.
And if customers are waiting there and there's no one there that's at the store, you build that responsibility that on Friday night, I got to go to bed. I got to get up. I got to make sure I'm there because the trains have to run. Like you have to get to the restaurant. You have to open it up. The other great thing about that experience, and it's probably what your sons have shared with you, is I got to see how hard they worked. Like I can say without equivocation, I am one of the most blessed people in the world because I have the most amazing parents. My mom passed away in 2020, but anything you see in me or anyone else, it's because of them. And if you see some shortcomings in me, it's because I didn't follow their directions. It's been a blessing. And to share that experience, not just in the home, but outside and see how you treat people, how you treat employees, how you treat customers, vendors. I learned all that stuff from my parents.
No, it's very special. Yeah, I will tell you, Mohammad, at some point, one of the episodes that I'm going to take a look at is kind of multi-generational businesses.
Yeah.
Because, I watched my dad work hard. You watched your parents. We worked hard. And then the question is, did I do a good enough job for my kids? Did I show them? And then will they have that same principle? And, so I don't know. It's just very interesting. Yeah. So once you're in Palmdale and you finish high school, you graduated out there?
Yeah. And you know what? At the time, I thought I was just going to go into businesses. So I graduated from high school. I was a bit of a knucklehead. I didn't work that hard in high school. I had thought I would just go into the businesses, acquire more businesses. And one of my uncles, Mohammad Khan, he actually pulled me to the side and asked me, he was like, hey, what's the game plan? What's next? And I told him I'm going to go into business. And he said, you know what? That's there and that will always be there. It's in your blood. But why don't you give education a shot? Why don't you go to school? And I think you could be a great lawyer. And it's that little conversation where someone takes an active interest in you. It's the first time outside of my parents, anybody actually looked at me in that light that sparked something in me. And from there, I was on a path where I worked really hard. I got into Berkeley, and then I went to Indiana for law school. But for the viewers, the listeners, take an active interest in someone. And if it weren't for my uncle, who, God rest his soul, he recently passed away, but if it weren't for him, I probably wouldn't have gone down this path. And it's free. You don't have to pay anything. You just take an interest in someone, especially a young person. So because of him and my parents, I then went to Berkeley and started doing my undergrad there.
So at Indiana, one of my boys went to Indiana.
Oh, great.
And so I used to go there once or twice a semester. I was doing some work in Kentucky for a manufacturing company, and I would stop in Bloomington. Great school. You had
amazing people.
Yeah, I mean, that had to be a great experience in their law school.
It was phenomenal. I mean, the parallels, and I really enjoyed my time at Berkeley and Indiana were down to Berkeley has a People's Park. Bloomington has a People's Park. It was the first time I had moved out of California, so I was worried. First, it was moving from Southern California to Northern California for undergrad. And then I moved to Indiana, and the people there, the dean, the students, the professors, the community, amazing people. I thoroughly enjoyed my time at Indiana. Although I learned a lesson when it came to having a proper winter coat. Us here in California, we don't have proper winter coats.
Yeah. So the one thing that was interesting, so when you finished law school in Indiana, the one thing I noticed with Ethan when he finished was, he could have ended up at a really great firm somewhere in Chicago, New York, anywhere on the East Coast. California really wasn't something that, was in his production possibilities frontier.
Right.
But he ended up doing really well through the interviewing process, and he got what he needed to get and got back out to the West Coast. Did you find it hard? Because I know your history kind of picks up back out here.
Right. No, I mean, and we might talk about this later on, but I love California.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a Californian through and through. Mm-hmm. My family's out here. So as soon as I was done, I knew that time was past, that chapter was closed. Flew back to California and started prepping for the bar. And that was a beast. It was very, very difficult. Mm-hmm. And I struggled with the bar exam for a few years. Eventually was able to clear it. And then from there, I started looking for employment within the area.
So talk to me a little bit about, so now, you're going through that process, your employment stops.
Yeah.
So, let's talk a little bit. I kind of want to hear about Carnival Cruises.
Yeah, definitely. So I actually had done an internship with Carnival Cruises in their HR, Princess Cruises in their HR department.
Princess, yeah.
And while I was with Princess Cruises, I had developed connections with the GC and one of the managers out there. And they really liked me. They brought me back as a law clerk and HR specialist. And I thoroughly enjoyed my time there. It was great to see a huge organization and see how folks interact with one another, and how folks in HR and different departments really care about the organization, the people they serve, and their employees. So that was my first sort of dipping my toes into, I really, really enjoy this employment law space. I enjoy employee interaction. I enjoy big companies. So then from there, I started thinking, okay, what's next?
So at that point, had you started practicing law?
No. So that was during my time where I was in between taking the bar exam and working. And once I had cleared the bar exam, I was pretty sure I was going to go the traditional route and join a law firm. Now, I didn't want to join a big law firm. It never really suited my style. I was looking for a smaller law firm, like a mid-sized firm, where I could make a direct impact and I could have access to clients and cases immediately. Usually if you go to the big law firms, and this is not a knock against them, I understand how the system works. You kind of go into your office and you work on pieces of a deal, if it's a transaction, or pieces of a case. You're not deposing people. You're not closing a sale. Whereas if you go to a medium to a small size firm, you get exposed to clients. You interact with CEOs, and you get a lot more experience in a shorter amount of time.
So as you're going through that process, let's talk about that first law firm that you went to. A little bit familiar with them. Definitely, they focus a lot on immigration law.
Right.
So.
Yeah. So when I joined the firm, I had been sending my resume out, doing informational interviews, doing regular interviews, and I got an offer from them. And when I joined, they were mostly in immigration, but they had a sister company that was also a CPA firm. And then they had a labor and employment transaction sort of vertical within the firm. So when I joined, they had placed me into the transactional work, the labor and employment work. So I never really touched immigration too closely. And then the sister CPA firm was there where I didn't really do too much CPA work, but I started learning a lot about the company and started taking on projects. The interesting thing is, and this goes back to and we'll talk about this as well, my core values of working hard.
What was the firm's name?
Chug LLP. And they're originally based out in Cerritos, and they have offices throughout the country as well as in India. Their managing partner, incredibly generous, kind individual, helped shape a lot of my own success. When I joined, though, I joined his team, and he was traveling all the time. So I was kind of on an island, and I had to figure things out. And so I made it up in my mind that, you know what, no matter what, I'm going to work as hard as I can, learn as much as I can, and we'll see what happens. So I would be the first one in at 7 a.m., back to the restaurant story, first one in at 7 a.m., and I would leave at 7 p.m., go home, eat dinner, go to sleep, rinse and repeat. And I didn't know it at the time. I read the book afterwards, but are you familiar with Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers? Yeah. So he has that 10,000 hour rule. I didn't know it at the time, but because I was able to put that extra time in, I got further along faster. And I recall family members and other employees saying, hey, why are you working 15 hours a day? How does it benefit you? You're a salaried employee. You're going to make the same no matter what. And something in me is, no, we've got to get the job done. We've got to do it right. It doesn't matter how much time I'm putting it in. Well, it paid dividends. I ended up becoming chief operating officer of the firm within 3 years, which was unheard of for the firm. And I became partner. I think I was the youngest partner in the firm's history. I was able to bring in the biggest judgment in the firm's history. So I was able to learn all these things. And in the process, I was able to learn how to run a firm and a business. So I was running, my last year there, I was basically running the legal practice and the CPA practice with other directors and manager level folks. And then I was also a full-time attorney. So I was just getting a wealth of information, not a great work-life balance, but I think that's okay, by the way. So all those folks that are averse to, or they say work-life balance, I think there's a time and place for everything. Your formative years, you work really hard so that you can enjoy later on. So that was my mindset, and I was able to go through, have a real direct impact on the company, and then transition out.
I got a question just as a sidebar, and then we'll kind of get back onto your track. Is like a lot of issues going on right now in the professional services around return to work, return to office. Yeah. I've done an episode or two on that. Hearing your experience getting to the COO in 3 years and partner for 3 to 5 years, you think it would have been possible if you would have came in at remote?
No, absolutely not. I was a bit strategic in that I wanted my managing partner to know that I was there before he was and I was there after he left. And also I had this physical interaction where I could stop by his office and have conversations with him and other folks in the organization. So I was building a rapport with other VP level, partner level folks. And that intimacy of being able to them see your face and get into dialogues with them, that helped quite a bit. So for me, I'm a big advocate of in person. Now, of course, societies change, logistics change, and I'm not saying it's not possible to succeed with a remote or a hybrid arrangement. But if you're looking at your career, all the individuals that are kind of thinking about their career in the long run, and you're going to have to work hard anyways, why not make a plan to get the furthest you can in the shortest amount of time is the way I think about it. And if that means coming in and being there and seeing the owner of the business one-to-one and having those conversations at 7:30 while everybody's leaving, you're chatting with them, building that rapport naturally allows you to go further. It just does. We're all humans. The more your boss interacts with you, the more they like you, the more you build a rapport with them, the more you work hard for them and the clients, the further you're going to get.
Yeah, I've been really, it was interesting during the pandemic within the consulting industry. I remember PricewaterhouseCoopers. I'm at IBM, but PricewaterhouseCoopers came out and they said, "Hey, we're gonna allow people to work indefinitely at home, like in remote." And I think forgetting all the details and the pros and cons, I was thinking about my career, and I was thinking, how do we grow the next generation of people? And I think where I'm at in my career too is like, I'm still willing, like you and I talked off mic. I travel 3.5 weeks, 4 weeks a month to wherever the work is. Like and sometimes like even if the client isn't paying, I'll pay for the trip myself. I make good money, and if it's something that will help my team, if it's something that will help develop the business or my relationships, and I think that's it's now called old school,
right? Absolutely.
But I still believe that is kind of, and I think when you start to get to a point and you don't value that, you value the time and now, like it's easier to work at home, and I don't have to get dressed up to go to work, and I don't have to this, that, and the other, and it's like anyway, enough of the sidebar.
There's incredible value in this, in seeing each other in person, and don't get me wrong, there's ways to do it, and there's ways for companies to figure out a compromise and work with their employees. And I know there's a different expectation for the newer generations. What I would tell companies and HR departments is figure out how can you come together and create something that makes sense for everyone.
That's right.
And to the extent there isn't, then you just have to hold firm on what your values are as a company.
Right. Yeah. Let me ask you about this. So I think you and I probably have some similar stories that, I worked at a big firm and kind of got to a point to start my own firm.
Yeah.
And, mine was a lot more, I think, thought through a bit, which was, in my MBA, after my undergrad, I had my MBA, they ask you, different tracks, and one of the tracks was, entrepreneurship and how could you kind of get something set up. So I was able to model a company that I'd want to start. I was able to learn how to use my finance knowledge to do cash flows for small companies and find the break even. And then, okay, if I had clients, and then what would be the overhead and this, that, and the other. So eventually, though, in your situation, you're at a firm that's doing really well.
Right.
You're getting great experience. There's kind of two parts that I think people think about at that point. It's like, one, I could continue going. I'm on a pretty good trajectory, and depending on the size of the firm, if the person above you is a principal, they may or may not be going somewhere.
Right.
Then you got to really do some calculus. But if you step out of that, you could have some different opportunities that you wouldn't normally have. And that is the life inflection point. Like at that point, you're going to have to make a decision.
Absolutely.
And I think it's always easier to stay where you're at. And, it's funny is that, and you'll get to where I'm at in my career, where you do meet the people that stayed where they were at.
Right.
And, and we've all reached our own different levels of happiness and satisfaction. But I've always looked back and said, man, I'm so glad I did that. And so let's talk about your point of getting ready to start your own law firm.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And likewise, I feel the same way. It was a really difficult decision. I thought I would be a lifer. I thought I would retire with that firm. And my mentor, Les Whitney, who you've spoken with, and then my wonderful wife, Mevish, who she's my better half and has been more than a blessing in my life. They both really pushed me. They said, hey, look, in the long run, you're an entrepreneur, you have in your blood, you should really start your own firm. And even with that, I still had that anxiety and that sort of, I don't know, I've got something good. Am I going to go start something new? What if I fail? But I had enough support with the people around me, and it starts and ends with my wife. That said, you know what, let's give it a shot. Worst case scenario doesn't work out. And if it doesn't work out, then you can always go join another firm or go in-house or something like that. So thankfully, I had those two folks in my life pushing me. And then I also had a bit of a fracture with the managing partner. He had a different idea of where he wanted to go. I had a different idea where I wanted the firm to go. Ultimately, I probably was a little bit at fault. I probably got over my skis. I was running faster, and guilty as charged and millennial. I like to see progress a lot faster. Right. And he probably wasn't ready to give up the reins. But there came a point, and it just made sense to transition out. Now, like any great planner, I did it in the heart of the pandemic, so I probably wasn't too good at the planning phase. But July 2020, I decided to put up my own shingle. And at the time, I had an assistant with me, and I asked my managing partner, hey, do you mind if I ask him to come over with me? And he said, sure, no problem. And I start my practice under the cover of, I don't have office space, but it's a pandemic. We're a virtual firm. I didn't have two nickels to get an office space. So I started my own practice, and now in July will be 4 years, and it has been unequivocally the best decision I've ever made.
Yeah. No, we'll talk a little bit about, what it means as a business owner to try and find legal counsel and stuff like that. And we'll talk about a little bit how you and I connected. But I think your story is awesome. Talk a little bit about the areas of specialty. You and I talk outside of here too. Something that I find interesting about your firm is that, on top of great lawyers and a great staff, I think the ability that you guys do to keep up on law. And so I work for IBM Consulting, but I also own companies outside of that. And one of the companies I have is a consulting company, and I'm always kind of keeping an eye on employment law. Sure. And, big FTC just ruled 2 weeks ago, or actually a little bit longer than that, on being able to, do not compete, that stipulation, which was a big deal when I started my first firm. Yeah. And then, employment law within California, we also, that company is incorporated in a lot of different states that I have. And one of them we're incorporated in is Texas, because we got a pretty big presence there. Yep. The labor laws are a little bit more favorable towards the companies there than they are here in California. But talk about your law specialties and some of the areas. Because like I said, you put up a lot of information that's very helpful on keeping track of the high water marks of what's going on in California law.
Thank you for that. So I like to look at our firm as we have 3 verticals. The first vertical is the traditional legal services. That's civil litigation, where we defend companies. It's in employment law. So if an employee is suing a company, We're the team you would call to defend the company.
Okay.
We don't represent employers. We stay on the defense side of the ball. That's the first vertical. The second vertical is the transactional side. So we help companies buy and sell. So if you're looking to buy a company, sell a company, we help do that. If you have to draft a master services agreement, an NDA, scope of work, you name it, we take care of all of that. So we do a lot of the contract drafting. And then the third vertical is sort of like a general counsel compliance officer for companies. There's a huge segment of companies that are about 100 million and less in the market, and they either don't have the funds to hire a full-time general counsel or they don't have the need. They don't have enough work to keep them busy. So within that, we help their HR departments make sure that they stay out of lawsuits. We make sure that they're in compliance with state and federal regulations. So those are the three verticals that we're in. And then it's sort of our engagement with our clients is we try to build really not transactional relationships, but transformational relationships. And we really get to learn about the leadership team, about strategic initiatives that the company's trying to undertake, and offer guidance within that scope. So we develop a relationship where we're not just coming in to put out fires, which we do that as well, but we're learning about what the company's trying to do, where they're trying to go. And then we try to align the legal department and the people strategy to that greater strategy of the company.
So in the kind of the category of like preventing lawsuits. Yeah. And like I said, you and I've had discussion. I won't say necessarily about any companies I own, but just preventing lawsuits, I think is, it's kind of an interesting concept. And I think maybe, over the years of battle scars, you kind of want to, be preventing lawsuits can be in a lot of different ways. And it's not necessarily at the cost of employees, or it's not the cost of being, not compassionate or anything, but really just trying to protect the liability of the company. But what would you say would be some of the big focus areas that you guys give people recommendations on around that?
I would say 90% of employment law is communication. Doesn't matter how good your attorney is, how good your policies are. It's about communicating. And I've been an employee. My wife is an employee. It's not about us versus them, employer versus employee. It's about creating harmony and clear communication. So the best thing that a company can do today in order to reduce the exposure on getting sued by an employee is making sure your employees, when they're fired or they're let go, they're not shocked. And you say, okay, well, how do you do that? That's where progressive discipline, write-ups, verbal warnings, coaching, documenting all of that helps quite a bit. So I'll give you an example. There's an employee that comes in 30 minutes late, first 3 days of their job. You don't say anything because you're busy and you don't want to deal with it. And then they continue to come in late, and 7 months down the road, you say, you know what, I've had enough. You haven't documented anything, and you terminate the employee. Meanwhile, the employee thinks, I thought there was this magical 30-minute grace period. You haven't said anything, and now you're firing me. So now that employee is extremely upset. You're upset, and now you're leaving at where the temperature is very high. The other scenario would be, hey, Mohammad, I noticed you came in 30 minutes late today. Is everything all right? I just want to check in. Yeah, everything's okay. Well, it's important for us for you to be here on time. So please, let's tighten that up. Then 2 months later, it happens again. Mohammad, I told you about this, and I hope everything's okay, but we got to write you up. Don't make it a big deal. Just here's a write-up, put it in their file, and start building that documentation. It's doing two things. One, it's creating the protection for the company. And two, it's also putting the employee on notice so they're not shocked and angry and upset. Even if they disagree with the company at that point, at least they know it's coming. At least they've been put on notice and they've been given an opportunity to be coached up and correct their behavior. Without that, I don't care how great your policies are. If you hire me and you put me in your office and I'm walking around, you got to have that relationship with your employees where you're giving them a chance to coach them up or coach them out.
Talk a little bit about responding to lawsuits. It's interesting is that I have a lot of friends that own companies, and it kind of works both ways, like the being surprised thing, right? It's not a badge of honor, but I definitely have dealt with a lot of different legal situations, and I think it's hard. I mean, even to the point when you have like service showing up at your door or showing up somewhere and giving you, hey, this has just happened. And there's that shock and awe for the moment. And, some of my buddies are very type A aggressive, like that is the beginning of a battle. They're ready to go. And I think for me personally, even if I kind of have an idea it's coming, I think I always start from within, like what what is the situation? What am I responsible for? Like, instead of like narcissistically, like looking at it like it's, and probably the first thing I do is obviously call legal help in and try to kind of get my orientation. So when people get that, I mean, I'm sure you've been on the receiving ends of those types of calls. What's your advice when they get that shock?
Great question. It's a great question. I think I love the way you process it. My advice would be to take a deep breath. It's not time to just go to war right away or anything like that. First thing you want to do is just let it sit and contextualize it in your head. Like, what does this really mean? The second thing you want to do is, if you have EPLI, employment practice liability insurance, or any other type of insurance, you probably need to let your carrier know. Just have FYI, I got this, just in case a claim needs to be made. You'll also want to consider doing something called a litigation hold, meaning telling your IT department and your HR department, don't delete anything, don't destroy anything at this point. Sit tight, and then you'll want to reach out and get counsel to kind of guide you through the process. What I think is incredibly important once you've done those steps is have a frank conversation with your counsel. And if they're not providing you this information, then that's a red flag. But you don't want to be surprised about what this could be down the road. You want a lot of data. You want to figure out, what do we do? Do we fight? Do we settle? What does it mean to fight? What does it mean to settle? The last thing a client or a business owner wants is to be jazzed up and, yes, let's go to war, and the attorney's all in, only to have spent $100,000 on the attorney 6 months later, and the attorney turns to you and says, hey, Mohammad, I think we should settle. It's like, why didn't you tell me that 6 months ago before you billed me $100,000, right?
Yeah.
So have an honest conversation about what litigation costs in terms of monetary value, the management time waste, the anxiety and the headache that you'll carry with it, and then also the merits. Like, if you're being extorted, I fully understand that that's something that you don't want to have to deal with, right? And you want to fight. But take an objective approach, look at it, ask the attorneys to do an exposure analysis. Hey, what did we actually do wrong here? And then make an informed decision. And you can always revisit that at checkpoints. But in those first week or so, if you're able to do these items, you'll set yourself up for a better outcome. Now, I don't know if it'll be the best outcome or not, but at least you're moving forward with clear direction.
I have a little bit more information that I wanted to kind of get from you a little bit on selecting, law firms and stuff like that. But while we're still kind of on the establishment, some of the areas that you guys are focused on, talk a little bit about maybe some of the hot California legal issues that are happening like right now. The one that I think was out there that I was kind of interested in was PAGA.
Yeah, it's PAGA.
Or PAGA.
Yeah, Private Attorney General's Act.
Yeah, and a lot, like I said, a lot of my friends, have started to kind of, it's been in the conversations, and I'm not sure I'm fully tracking, and so I was just wondering from your perspective. Yeah,
so PAGA it's the Private Attorney General's Act, and what it essentially is it almost deputizes private citizens they call it the sue your boss law. The state of California doesn't have enough resources to enforce the labor code. So those are just the laws that we have to play by when we're working with employees. So what they say is they tell the employees, hey, you can stand in the shoes of all of the other employees at the company, and you can hire an attorney and you can sue your employer. And these are technical violations that are allowed. So I'll give you an example. One violation is if you have a pay stub. And on the pay stub, it says, I work at MNK Law Suite 301. And a year later, MNK Law moves to Suite 302. And your pay stub still says 301. You could get hit with $100 for the first penalty and $200 thereafter for each employee for each pay period.
Oh, wow.
So you can imagine if you pay an employee on a weekly basis and you have 100 employees, we're talking about millions of dollars in exposure.
Wow.
And then from that, the state takes 75%, 25% goes to the employees. So there's an imbalance there. And then the attorneys that brought the case are incentivized because their attorney's fees get fully paid out. And guess who's writing that check? The employer, the businesses.
Right.
So this has been, there's been a huge significant increase in these types of lawsuits. And they're sort of collective actions, class actions, but used through the PAGA form. And what has recently happened, and I believe it's a ballot initiative in California right now to repeal that and replace it with a different type of law where the employees are still taken care of. But that's a hot button item. And what I'll say briefly, this is probably a topic for a podcast in and of itself, but the things companies can do right now to help protect themselves is do PAGA audits proactively. And what that means is take a look at your policies and procedures, take a look at how you interact with your employees, your wage and hour policies and procedures. Make sure your frontline managers understand meal and rest break laws. Look at potentially instituting arbitration agreements, which are helpful. And then also attestation forms. When folks get paid, they attest that they got their meal and rest breaks. Those are some things that they can help combat with it. But that's one of the hot button items right now.
Yeah. No, I owned a construction company for almost 15 years. And that company, we did underground boring and excavation.
Okay.
And so it included a lot of equipment. The downside with that business was insurance was really expensive, and did get a lot of legal support because you did, especially in underground construction, you hit
A lot of
things.
exposure there,
But the other thing is there was a lot of stuff that went on with workers and meal breaks and travel time, sometimes traveling, an hour each way to a business, and they'll come to the yard. Yeah. All of them will get into a work truck and take off. Well, did their time start right there?
Exactly.
And a lot of times you innocently fall into situations.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, where people get keyed up on what the law is, and they're like, hey, and they want to take advantage of that situation. And I think we'll talk about this about California, but it really makes it hard being an employer trying to create jobs. Is you definitely, it wasn't like maliciously you're trying to take the time away, but I think kind of using the PAGA as kind of an example. So it feels a little like an overreach.
Yeah, and I'll start by saying there are really bad employers out there, and the laws are there to protect the employees. But there's also incredibly generous, kind, good-hearted employers. Mm-hmm. That's the vast majority that I've dealt with. And no good deed goes unpunished. You pay for an employee's lunch, and you provide lunch to all the employees. I don't want to get into the nuance of it, but that's considered a form of compensation that's supposed to be worked back into your base rate of pay. Mm. If you want to give your employees bonuses at the end of the year, again, you're trying to do something nice for the employee. That then has to get factored into the base rate of pay, and then the overtime amount goes up. And if you don't do that, then you get hit with a PAGA suit or a class action suit or an individual claim. And the employer over here is just trying to do something nice for their employees.
Right.
And they're getting hit with these lawsuits. So I empathize, I feel for these employers, because in my experience, overwhelming majority of employers in the state and other employers that I know, they care for their employees, they care for their state, they care for their business and their customers.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you this. I wanted to switch up a little bit and talk about people that are out there that might want to get advice on really trying to choose legal representation. And I would say from the perspective, not only, and maybe we'll take a few minutes to talk about it from the context of a startup, but also as a going concern or a company that's out there kind of going through. And there's kind of 3 areas of consideration or kind of milestone points that I think are kind of interesting. I just want to kind of get your take on that.
Definitely.
As like, we talked a little bit about this earlier, is, the first part would be you start a company, and we'll talk about that. The second part is protecting that company once it gets going. And then the third part is the company grows. And so growing with a company, and it has some different challenges. But when you talk about startup, just to kind of give you an example, is like, I remember starting up one of my companies at the very beginning. I realized that it was almost like you had to step back to step forward. Yeah. I had customers, I had people that wanted to join the firm. I'd done the cash flow. I could tell this thing would be able to very quickly break even. I'm very risk averse. So I'm not going to start something that I thought would put my family at risk or my well-being. So, but the first advice that I got was, hey, you need to kind of get this thing set up correctly, and it was, a lot of different documents and trying to get the incorporation, the type of company. And I was just kind of curious, if you kind of go through that process of starting the company, what are, because I'm sure you get that call like, hey, I need to kind of get something going. Talk about some of the key docs and some of the things that have taken under consideration at the beginning.
Yeah. And I think it's great that we're talking about this topic. When it comes to starting your company, you have a bunch of different options, but you want to get the paperwork in place. So you need to incorporate your company. And what does that mean? It just means legally create it, give it birth. Mm-hmm. And there's a bunch of different people that can help you do that. You can go to an attorney like myself. You can go to a CPA. They can do it. They don't have to be a registered attorney to do it. Or you could use these online platforms like Zoom and LegalZoom and some of these other places. My general advice is use an attorney. That's what I feel comfortable when you're starting a business. You don't know how big it's going to grow and what it's going to grow to. So you want to measure 3 times, cut once, do it the right way. And the things that you'll need to decide when you're creating a company is what type of company. Is it going to be an Inc., an S Corp, a C Corp, an LLC? Where are you going to incorporate? Sometimes you'll hear in the startup world in Silicon Valley, everyone wants to incorporate in Delaware or in Nevada. And the reason why they want to do that is because investors are very comfortable with those laws. And they're comfortable with how corporations are structured and adjudicated, notwithstanding some of the recent stuff with Elon Musk. But so you have to decide where you're going to incorporate. And then you have to file your articles of incorporation, which in the state of California, you would do it through the Secretary of State. You'll have to create your playbook for your entity. That's either your bylaws or your operating agreement. And that just basically says, look, us 5 partners, look, us 2 partners, this is how we're going to run the company. And if anything happens, this is how we're going to deal with it. And then you issue your shares or your membership units. You don't actually do the certificate so much anymore, but you could do that as well. And you have a corporate kit full of all of your records. You get your EIN number, so you're a legal person in the IRS's eyes. And then once you get all that set, then you have to also think about other things, what the company is going to look like in the future. And we don't like to think about it, but what if one of the partners passes away? What happens to those shares? Does it go to the partner's family? Does the family get a say in how the business is run? And you can do that through, it's called a buy-sell agreement, take care of something like that. But you want to get all of the paperwork in place, get the ownership in place. If things go south and there's a dispute between the partners, you want to have a rule book, a document that can kind of tell you, this is what we're going to do. And then also how you wind up the company if you ever have to. So get your house in order, do the incorporation paperwork. That's first and foremost. Most important thing.
Yeah, it's interesting, Mohammad. It's like, you know, like I said, I've had a lot of different experiences, and you know, there's so much positive energy at the time when you're starting something.
Absolutely.
And you know, you gave the 3 options. Zoom legal was not an option back in the day,
Right.
And the CPAs, you know, again, I probably wasn't sophisticated or, you know, had CPAs around me at that point that I felt comfortable.
Right.
And I think the getting the lawyer part was the most helpful. I think I didn't start my first company until actually I was after my MBA, and I realized I think the one thing the MBA kind of teaches you and trains you a bit is make sure you get the right help.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
for all the things that you're talking about, whether, you know, the buy-sell agreements, how's the company going to run,
Right.
you know, you really are trying to mark off who your partner is too, and try to, you know, earnestly go into it. It's, you know, some of my hardest business situations have been, you know, the dissolution of partnerships or business relationships. And, you know, I mean, more brutal than divorce.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's, and so I think having a lawyer at the very beginning, to me, this is a testimonial, is like, because you have seen so many different situations, it was also, I would say, as much advice, like counseling on how to do and what to consider. So I thought that was useful. Let's talk about the second phase. So, you know, really protecting and defending the company. So, you know, once the company gets up and, you know, like I said, for my example, you know, I had clients lined up, I had people that I can onboard, you know, you then start to potentially operate, and you know, you've got to get some key documents. That first contract that comes in, you got to make sure that's set up. You realize, you start reading, it's like, I have a lot of rights, but I also have a ton of responsibilities, and one of them is insurance and all of these other things that I need to do. And now, even today, electronic surveillance of all of the information and the documentation, you know, that you really are taking custody of, and or indirectly through your employees. And so talk a little bit about some of the areas, because this kind of goes back to your employment laws. Once you're a going concern, you become a, you know, potential area of opportunity out there.
You know, what tends to happen with business owners is they're so focused on building the business that they might not be as focused on protecting the business. And this is kind of the second stage in the growth of a company. You do the startup, you get through that, and then you get into the second phase where it's like, okay, this thing is growing. And I no longer, it's more than just 2 employees. There's 30 employees here. We're doing a lot of revenue. We're doing big contracts with, or big services for XYZ company, or manufacturing this for that company. You want to start making sure your documentation and sort of the legalese around your company is taken care of. What do I mean by that? One, internally, you should consider offer letters for your employees, make it clear that they're at-will employees, have a handbook, another rule book on, hey, this is how we run the company. Make sure you have write-up forms, all of those things, right? So take care of the human resources side of it. Make sure everybody knows what's going on and you're growing in a responsible fashion. And then externally, when you're working with vendors, when you're working with customers, you can't just do it by chance or by a handshake. And I understand the older school might have just done a handshake, but there's too much at stake for you and your company. So get the proper MSA agreements in place, get the proper contracts in place, non-disclosures. If you have a vendor that's helping you, have all of that taken care of. And then the last piece of the pie is make sure your compliance is taken care of. Anything that you have to do with the state of California, with the federal government, anything else that requires any compliance issues that you need to take care of, do all of that in this middle phase. And that's incredibly important because you've created the foundation. Now you're building on the foundation. And then the third phase, which you'll get to, in order to get to that phase responsibly, whether it's an exit or a sale or going public, your house has to be in order. So spend a lot of time really drilling down on saying, hey, how do we feel about our business, our relationships with folks outside and inside?
And then I think, like you said, the last part of this is as a law firm, from your perspective, or an owner on my side, would be kind of growing with the firm.
Yeah.
You know, I think that the biggest principle that I have gained, and all the years of having businesses, was lawsuits change things.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, extremely. It could open your eyes up to areas that you didn't really anticipate. It will remind you that things are real, and that you need to kind of be able to kind of take protections, and so probably when it comes to the actual legal representation, is you kind of have to evaluate, like, have you outgrown the firm you're with, or has the firm that you've been with as your legal representation, maybe you haven't kept pace and you're not in that portfolio of the high touch. You might have been important 10, 15 years ago, and you may not be now.
Right.
And so, you kind of, so a lot of things kind of drive different activities. But yeah, I would say, what are your thoughts on that point? Is, you see companies kind of getting to, hey, I'm at a different phase now.
Yeah. So I think it's really incredibly important to build partnerships and relationships in the long run. So the attorney that you're building that relationship throughout the process, they should be well placed to help usher you through each of these phases. And to the extent that something's outside of their expertise, they should have the confidence in the relationship to say, hey, Troy, I'm going to go ahead and pull in this person. We're selling, it's going to be a securities issue, or we're selling, or there's this large immigration matter that came up. Let's bring in counsel. I'll manage that relationship. So there has to be that trust and that sort of unity of interest with your attorneys. And if your attorneys don't have that, then that's a red flag. Other things is, with your attorneys, they need to be incredibly organized and responsive. You're hiring me to take stuff off your plate, to make your life easier. And if I'm dropping the ball and following up and making sure things aren't done, then I'm not holding up my end of the bargain, right? So that's another thing that you want to look in with your attorney. And then also, does your attorney give advice that's counter to their own interest? That goes back to me having that conversation early on when you get sued. It would be in my interest to, okay, you want to fight? Let's fight. And then bill $100,000, $200,000 and then come back. Or is your attorney saying, I'm with you each step of the way. I'm ready to fight this till the end, but I want to give you some clarity on what the road looks like ahead, so that you don't have any buyer's remorse later on if we're too far in. So hopefully you've cultivated a relationship with your attorney through the startup phase and the mid phase. And then the third phase, what I call the exit phase potentially, that's, are we going to go public? Are we going to sell? Are we going to hand over the company to the next generation, whether it's internally or not? That attorney should be able to be a steward for you and help be a guide through that process as well. And if you're lacking anything or you're not sure, you should be able to have that conversation with them and get the right people in.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think just to share with the listeners a little bit, I mean, from my perspective, is like, once I established my legal family, my legal group, it was pretty powerful, like you said. And I think this is something, a lot of people kind of aspire to, is like, coming out of MBA school, I had a law professor that was he was almost so inspirational that like, I'm like, should I be going to business school or go to law school? I mean, he was unbelievable. His name is Rich Hahn, and Rich was an adjunct professor at USC, but he also was general counsel for Disney, and he was a great mentor, even as a professor, you know. And so once my company started going really decent, I went to him and said, "Hey, you know, I have a couple problems." He's like, "Hey, I can take care of you." And he, outside of school, and I was gone out of school for a while, or MBA school. But then he came to me and goes, "Sam, you know, Troy, I just received a judgeship." So he was appointed by the governor at that time, and he's a pretty high level, you know, judge even today. And he goes, "But my firm, I have a junior partner who's going to basically take it over and be the named partner. Would you mind?" And so that became Wayne Kasai. Wayne, you know, definitely represented us for many years. And, you know, but through that process, we had some pretty significant legal issues. And one of the legal issues that we had, it was a competitive issue with a different company. Okay. And I had an employee that I had hired, and this person had, you know, really, it was in the sales area, and that do not compete thing. Right, this person came in and used their capabilities to get business. And through the deposition process, I found out that there was actually files brought into my company from this other firm. And so anyway, I'm in court, and we're going through this process, and this lawyer on the other side was from Shepherd Mullen. Right. He was he was brutal. I mean, this guy was a viper, and you know, Ryan McCourtney, and Ryan. You know what it is? Is like I always tell even my employees, say I think personally I have emotions. I definitely do. Sure. Sometimes on the verge of, you know, breaking down, but in business I'm pretty clear. Yeah. And I'm in the middle of this lawsuit, and I'm getting my ass handed to me. Uh-huh. I mean, this guy, Ryan, comes in, Wayne and I are going through, I thought we were really prepared. And this guy came in and just did an unbelievable job, right, and crushed us. Yeah. And you know, and like I said, when I say I don't have an emotion, it wasn't like I didn't want to win. Right. It costs a tremendous amount of money with that lawsuit. But I honestly woke up the next day and I wasn't worried about the money. It's like, I need to hire that guy. Yeah. That was the only thing I could think about. Yeah. It's like, because this type of situation could happen again. Yeah. I always, there's lawsuits that happen when you have a professional services firm on the periphery a lot. And so I need this guy. And so I talked to Wayne, just like, you know, you and I talking. I said, "Wayne, nothing personal here, but, you know, transactionally, corporate wise, you're awesome. And you are my friend and my partner." And he's like, "No, Troy, this guy, this is what he does. He's a litigator." And so we brought Shepherd Mullen into the fold. Yep. And then, you know, and I would just say that was an avenue. And so through my connection to Shepherd Mullen, was able to get, you know, different types of help if I needed it. And then that kind of shifted it to personal. Yeah. But, you know, so a relationship. And then kind of in the end, just to kind of get back to you, is, you know, probably, I want to say 2022. Oh. Yeah, it might have even been when I was serving in the administration. I got a call, "Hey, I'm Wayne Kasai's wife." And she goes, they found Wayne dead in his office, like a guy had passed away. And it's like, "Oh my God." And she goes, I'm going through all of his stuff, and, you know, you've been with him for 20 years or, you know, and I'm just not sure what we need to do. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, as a backdrop, you know, not really looking for more legal advice and not really going out there, you know, that trying to find legal help. That's why I wanted to have you on the show, kind of coming full circle, is, you know, it's, I think trying to find somebody that kind of holds your values, doesn't try to do the $100,000 and then tell you at the end, is like, "Look, this is the problem." And then, you know, also realizing, you know, is mature enough and professional enough to know that, like, a client does have different needs. And like you said, sometimes you have to pull different people in.
Yeah.
And I remember as a consultant, that was totally something you never want to do. It's like, I'm going to pull in another firm.
Right.
It's like, but so I don't know. I just thought that kind of sharing that a little bit. And, you guys definitely from MNK stepped in and, even today are a big help. And we were very appreciative of that.
I mean, it's a pleasure. And thank you so much for entrusting us. For me, it comes down to my clients are the most important thing, my employees and my clients and my business. Mm-hmm. Make sure my employees are taken care of and then my clients. So if I'm on an international trip and somebody needs my help,
wonder if that happened.
I'm going to pick up the call. There's no, I tell all of the attorneys and the folks on my team, look, they're not calling us out of, it's a fun time. Something's probably happened that they need you. Mm-hmm. And we need to instill that confidence in them that we care about them and they are our priority. Yeah. And when you have somebody that's on your team, even your leadership team internally, when you have somebody that I can rely on her, I can rely on him, it helps empower you as a business owner, and you need those folks on your team. Mm-hmm. It's a little different, but I think we should all have our own board of advisors. Mm-hmm. Like companies have board of advisors. As individuals, we should have trusted advisors that you can go to, and no matter what, they're in the foxhole with me. No matter what, they care about me. They have my best interest. Even if they tell me something I don't want to hear, they've got my best interest. And to be able to cultivate those relationships is incredibly important. And that's why I've started my firm. That's what I love doing. I love being that resource for people, to be on their leadership team, on their board, and have these kind of conversations where it's like, okay, let's dig deeper. Let's find a solution.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Mohammad, like I said, I'm very grateful for you and your team. And just in closing, laws in California, and being able, I always tell people, anybody that listens to the show regularly knows they probably get tired of hearing it's like, I love this state.
Yeah.
I'm all in. As a business owner, all my friends left. Right. As a business owner, the taxes are crazy. The employment laws are crazy. But I'm still here, and I still, I want to be able to be constructively involved. I did 12 years of public service at the local level to try to do something. And so I guess the question to you is, from a legal perspective, when you look out for California, for the years ahead for your kids and, again, specifically legally, what do you see? And do you think there's a reason to be hopeful, or do you think that, we're just going down a bad direction and maybe I should reconsider?
I'm like you. I'm a Californian through and through. I love the state. I love the people of the state. So I try to be cautiously optimistic. And there are a lot of headwinds. There's a lot of challenges, right? And it's become very difficult for employers and businesses to exist in California. That's just a fact. That's just true. The way I look at it is, okay, well, how do we find a way for companies to continue to operate in this space? Well, hopefully we'll get some new leadership. We'll get some folks in place that will help implement change. But what can we do right now? And some of the things I think as business owners we can do is start that communication, that dialogue with our employees. Because if you have good relationships with your employees, it helps reduce the exposure as much as possible. So even if there's all of these laws and this compliance stuff that you have to follow through on, try to cultivate those relationships. Teach your managers. Focus on those items. That will help quite a bit. And then beyond that, I think there's strategic things we can do. Like I advise a lot of my clients, start a litigation fund. I know that sounds absurd when you first hear it, but take 1% to 3% of your net profit each year, put it in a money market account that you can access immediately, and just know that there's a cost of doing business. And it's not just California. In a lot of states, wherever you go, there's always going to be a cost of doing business in the form of lawsuits, whether they're with your employees, whether they're with your customers not paying you, vendors, whatever it is. Have those funds there and let that build up. And best case scenario, you don't need to use it, and now you force yourself to save all of this good money. Worst case scenario, that event comes where you get this lawsuit, and instead of it being catastrophic to your business, you at least have a litigation fund where you can figure out a solution. So those are some things we can do, but I don't want to be doom and gloom, but there are significant headwinds for business in California. And as long as we get out there, we express our opinions, we try to implement change, who knows what can happen. So one primary example is this PAGA reform. PAGA has been devastating for employers in California. Devastating. But now there's an initiative, right? And there's folks out there that are are pushing for it to be repealed and more common sense legislation put in place. So get out there, get active. Business owners, it's not enough to just sort of be a business owner and not involved in your communities. You need to be involved with your chambers. You need to be involved with your local representatives, the mayors. You need to have these conversations and these dialogues so they can hear you and understand what you and your employees are going through on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I had Lou Correa on the show. He's a congressman from Santa Ana area, Democrat. And, being a mayor, being a business owner out here, you've got to work both sides of the aisle in California because, very significantly Democrat. And, Lou always reminds me of a guy that's like, if he's heard it, he doesn't forget it, you know? And I think what you're saying is really good advice. I mean, a lot of the concerns I would have as a tech business owner, I would talk to him and Michelle Steele or both sides of the aisle, and a lot of different congressional members and state representatives to make sure that like the tree doesn't fall in the forest and not heard. Yeah. I don't like all the stuff that comes, but again, you can't just sit back and just throw a shoe at the TV either. Exactly. You got to kind of get out there.
You have to engage. And there's folks listening on both sides. To your point, there's folks that are willing to listen on both sides of the aisle and work together. And it might not be the stuff that hits the main headline on the 8 o'clock news or whatever it is, the 5 o'clock news. But get involved and talk to your congresspeople, talk to your mayors, talk to your governor, interact with folks, and then see if you can implement change. And hopefully we move in the right direction. One thing's for sure. Well, you can never say never, but I'm Californian through and through. I'm going to be here through it. And whether that means I get involved and I start helping out in whatever way I can, then I'm open to it. But I love the state.
Yeah, no, me too, Mohammad. Well, Mohammad, I just really appreciate you coming down. And, it's funny. We started in our relationship in the pandemic, and we need to actually make some time, break bread and get out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because we definitely spend a lot of time on the phone together. So I appreciate you being on the show, and I wish you and your firm the very best.
Thank you again so much for having me.
Thanks again for joining me today on the Ameritocracy Show. Be sure to follow me on social media and our website at troyedgar.com, where you can get more information and sign up for my weekly email. I hope you have a great week.